Have you ever been on the road, minding your own business, only to have flashing red and blue lights disrupt your day without explanation? Today's story unravels a tense confrontation between a police officer and a young black woman on a quiet evening in Chicago, where a simple traffic stop spirals into something far more shocking and consequential. When this driver hands over something that reveals her true identity, the officer's entire world flips upside down, and the wave of events that follow leaves him questioning everything he thought he knew. Prepare for twists, raw emotion, and a ruthless swing of karma. Officer Gavin Wilson had been with the Chicago Police Department for nearly 15 years. He prided himself on being a no-nonsense cop, one who had grown up in the tough streets of the South Side. He had witnessed it all, the darkest corners of humanity, the helplessness of victims, the triumph of justice. At least, he liked to see himself in that heroic light. But somewhere along the way, a subtle bitterness had taken root in Gavin's heart. He spent years chasing criminals, busting drug rings, and writing endless citations, and it seemed to him as though each day was more exhausting than the last. He began carrying that weariness along with his concealed prejudices wherever he went. On a brisk Saturday evening, the wind coming off Lake Michigan sent a chill through Chicago's busy streets. The city lights flickered in the early autumn dusk. Officer Wilson was on duty, patrolling a neighborhood he believed to be troublesome. Although there had been no radio calls or bulletins about suspicious activity, Gavin found himself restless. He wanted something, anything, to sink his teeth into before his shift ended. As he circled the block for the third time, he noticed a black sedan drive by. The driver, a young black woman, was going precisely the speed limit, had her seatbelt fastened, and didn't appear to be engaged in anything out of the ordinary. Yet Gavin decided to follow her. He couldn't articulate exactly why. Maybe it was the wariness of repeated experiences in similar neighborhoods. Maybe it was an unconscious assumption brewing inside him. But as he saw her put her blinker on and make a perfectly legal turn, he flicked on his siren. The woman pulled over immediately, the car settling near a Starbucks at the corner of East 53rd Street. The sight was so typical of Chicago, a coffee shop bustling with customers, a CTA bus rattling by on its route, and a patrol cruiser with its lights painting the street in bright pulses of color. Officer Wilson took a moment, heart pulsing with an adrenaline he couldn't completely explain. He grabbed his flashlight and approached the sedan. The driver rolled down the window. She was in her late 20s, with neatly braided hair that fell to her shoulders. Her posture was calm, though the flicker of surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. "Good evening, officer," she said politely, though her tone carried a certain reserve. Her name was Ebony Carter, a name Officer Wilson didn't know yet, but one that would soon send shockwaves through his life. "Driver's license and registration, please," Gavin said. His voice was curt, his posture stiff with authority. He cast a practiced eye over the interior of the car. Nothing seemed out of place, no open containers, no suspicious items, just a neat interior, a large leather handbag on the passenger seat, and a single Starbucks cup in the cup holder. "Of course," Ebony said. She reached over to the glove compartment to retrieve her documents. "Could you tell me why I'm being pulled over?" she asked. "You failed to come to a complete stop at the sign," Gavin lied, pressing his lips together. In truth, Ebony had stopped properly. Officer Wilson had actually watched her do it. But in the moment, he believed that no one would question him if he cited the stop sign violation. Ebony narrowed her eyes but said nothing as she handed over her license, registration, and proof of insurance. The name on the license read Ebony Carter, and under the photograph was an address located in a particularly upscale part of the city. Gavin gave it a glance. She clearly didn't fit the profile he had concocted in his mind for someone driving through this neighborhood. but he wasn't ready to let her go. He walked back to his cruiser, typed Ebony's information into the system. She had 0 traffic violations, 0 outstanding warrants. A spotless record, not even a speeding ticket. Her registration and insurance were up to date, no reason to prolong the stop. Officer Wilson felt a pang of frustration, but he still wasn't done. He stepped out of the squad car again, returning to Ebony's driver's side window. "Ma'am," he began in the stiff, formal tone officers used to project authority. "Please step out of the vehicle." It was an unusual request, especially with no indicated cause, but Ebony obeyed, stepping onto the curb, her breath visible in the chill as she exhaled. To the casual observer, they might have thought Ebony was in trouble, but Ebony's expression remained calm. She seemed to know exactly how to handle herself. Gavin began asking a series of prying questions. Where was she going? Who was she meeting? Where did she work? Did she have any contraband in the vehicle? Had she been drinking? Every inquiry arrived with an air of accusation, an unspoken assumption that Ebony Carter was up to no good. Despite the barrage, Ebony answered politely. She explained she was on her way to meet a friend for a late dinner at Harold's Chicken Shack, a well-known Chicago staple just a few blocks away. She hadn't consumed any alcohol, she had no weapons, no drugs, she had nothing to hide and said so directly, still looking him in the eye. But Officer Wilson continued, "Is there anything in your bag, ma'am, that you'd like to tell me about? Maybe a weapon, a firearm, or something else that shouldn't be there?" Ebony shook her head calmly. "No, officer. There's nothing in my bag you need to be concerned about." Despite her cooperation, Gavin insisted, "Ma'am, would you mind opening it so I can check?" Ebony hesitated. She knew her rights. She knew that an officer can't just search her personal property without probable cause. But she also knew that refusing a search could escalate the situation. So, with measured composure, she replied, "Officer, if you have reason to believe I'm carrying anything illegal, I'm sure you know the protocol for a proper search. Otherwise, I'd rather not have my personal belongings rifled through. I'm simply driving to dinner." That response lit a fuse in Gavin's mind. His gut reaction was to interpret Ebony's reluctance as defiance. The seeds of his prejudice sprouted, twisting his sense of reason. He couldn't bear the idea of letting her go without proving himself right, or at least finding something to justify this entire stop. He stared at Ebony with a silent challenge, as though daring her to do something that would give him an excuse. "Ma'am," he began again, "if you continue to refuse a search, I have enough probable cause to call for a 9 unit. Ebony arched an eyebrow, an almost imperceptible sign of frustration. She took a breath. "Officer, I haven't refused anything. I'm simply telling you that I am aware of my constitutional rights. There's no probable cause because I haven't done anything, nor have you demonstrated any suspicious conduct on my part. If you want to call a 9, I won't stop you, but I'll also need your badge number for my record." For a moment, an internal war waged within Gavin Wilson. He had never liked being challenged, particularly not by someone he already perceived as looking for trouble. Yet Ebony's calm, assured demeanor placed an uncertain weight in his chest. It was as though she was reciting the law chapter and verse, something a layperson might not do so precisely. Why did she know the exact lines of procedure? He was about to demand she turn around and put her hands on the car, anything to regain control, when Ebony did something that took him by absolute surprise. She opened her bag, reached inside, and pulled out a business card. She handed it to him quietly. It read, "Assistant State's Attorney, Cook County." Underneath that bold title was her name, Ebony Carter, followed by the official letterhead and address of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Officer Wilson felt the ground shift under him. His mind reeled. He stared at the card, swallowing as an involuntary chill traveled up his spine. Ebony Carter was no random civilian. She was an assistant state's attorney. That meant she was part of the very team that prosecuted criminals, possibly even criminals, that Wilson himself had arrested. It also meant that Ebony was intimately familiar with police procedures, constitutional rights, and the intricacies of lawful stops. The humiliating realization that he might have just overstepped or even violated her rights pounded in Gavin's chest, and for a split second, Ebony's eyes locked with his. He sensed that she saw right through him, through his uneasy stance, through the tension in his jaw, right into that unspoken prejudice that had guided his decision to pull her over. "Are we done here, Officer Wilson?" Ebony asked gently, placing emphasis on his name. She'd seen his name and badge number the moment he approached. Gavin's mind raced. Part of him was furious. He felt cornered, attacked for simply doing his job. The other part knew he was in deep trouble. An assistant state's attorney was no stranger to administrative complaints, lawsuits, or departmental policy reviews, and Ebony Carter was the last person he wanted to tangle with. Ignoring the jolt of panic in his veins, he cleared his throat. "You're free to go, Miss Carter," he managed to say, handing back her license and registration. The dull shame in his voice was hard to hide. Ebony returned her documents to her bag. She looked at Gavin one last time, an indecipherable expression on her face. Then she slid back into her car and drove away, leaving Gavin standing beside his cruiser, the taste of regret thick on his tongue. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of what would become one of the most tumultuous weeks of his career and his life. The next morning, Ebony Carter found herself sitting at her desk in the Cook County State's Attorney's office. Usually her days involved reviewing case files, meeting with detectives, and coordinating with her colleagues on upcoming court proceedings. That day, however, she was distracted by the events of the previous night. She felt a swirl of emotions, anger, exasperation, but also a calm resolve. Incidents like these, where black motorists were pulled over for seemingly no reason, were unfortunately not uncommon. She had seen it in the news, in everyday stories shared by friends and acquaintances. But now, it had happened to her, and the intimidation she felt in that moment still made her chest tighten. Sighing, she opened a new file on her computer and typed up a concise but thorough report of the stop. She detailed the events, the alleged stop sign violation that never occurred, the invasive questions, the unsubstantiated threats of a 9-unit, and the entire ambience of suspicion cast upon her for no discernible reason. Ebony hesitated. Did she want to escalate this matter? She was used to the idea that friction with the police was often resolved internally, or sometimes was never resolved at all, just accepted as a reality. But she wasn't just an average citizen. She was in a position to hold people accountable. She was in a role intended to enforce and uphold the law for the sake of justice. Her sense of principle pressed upon her that she should, at the very least, file a complaint or speak to the Internal Affairs Division. Still, she weighed the pros and cons carefully. She didn't want to become the story herself. She wanted to protect her own rights, but she also wanted to send a message that abuse of power would not go unchecked. After some deliberation, Ebony decided she would speak directly to a colleague in the Civilian Office of Police Accountability COPA. She'd share her story, let them investigate, and see where the facts led. If Officer Wilson's record was clean, perhaps this would become a teaching moment. If not, it could point to deeper systemic problems that Ebony and her office needed to address. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Gavin Wilson paced his small, cramped office at the precinct. He kept reliving the events of the traffic stop, each flash of memory igniting a spark of dread. He had made the mistake of forcibly pulling someone over for no legitimate reason, and that someone happened to be an assistant state's attorney. The potential ramifications gnawed at him, a possible investigation, disciplinary measures, maybe even suspension. He tried to reassure himself that Ebony Carter might decide not to file a complaint. Perhaps she'd be too busy or too cautious about rocking the boat. But something in the back of his mind whispered that a woman who carried herself with such calm confidence wasn't likely to let it slide. He glanced around the bustling precinct. The faint scent of burnt coffee lingered in the air, an omnipresent fixture of police stations everywhere. Passing officers nodded at Gavin in greeting, and while he nodded back, he couldn't shake the sense that they could see right through him, as though they already knew his transgression. To distract himself, Gavin immersed himself in paperwork from previous cases, but every so often his mind would wander. He thought about Ebony's posture as she refused to let him search her bag. He remembered her unwavering eye contact, how she had calmly presented her business card, effectively flipping the power dynamic. A wave of frustration surged through him again. Who did she think she was? The question was unfair, but in moments of fear, the human mind grasps at blame. Instead of confronting his own prejudice and insecurities, Gavin blamed Ebony for placing him in a predicament. To quell the tension, he decided to leave for an early lunch. He headed to the nearby McDonald's, the one on West Adams Street that was always swarmed with downtown office workers. He stood in line, restless, arms folded. As he waited to order, he checked his phone and noticed an email from a name he recognized in his department's Internal Affairs division. His stomach clenched. He clicked it. The message was short. Please report to Internal Affairs tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to discuss a complaint filed against you. Reference hashtag 1027. Thank you. A single line that threatened to upend his entire career. Gavin's appetite vanished. That evening, Ebony finished a long day and decided to unwind by calling her mother, Dr. Leslie Carter, a professor of sociology at the University of Chicago. Leslie listened intently as Ebony recounted the story, her voice wavering only slightly when she described how the officer had told her to step out of the car. "I'm just so sick of this," Ebony said, her voice thick with emotion she usually kept hidden under her professional demeanor. "I wasn't speeding. I didn't do anything wrong. And yet he went through that entire script like I was a criminal in the making." Her mother was quiet for a moment, letting Ebony's words settle. Then she spoke with a steadiness that Ebony had cherished all her life. "Honey, you've accomplished so much, and you stand for justice every day in your work. Sometimes we face these unjust moments, not because we did anything wrong, but because the world still has a lot of growing to do. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. And I'm proud you reported it." Ebony felt a knot in her chest loosen. She had done the right thing. She believed in accountability, and she believed that shining a light on wrongdoing was the only way to progress. Even if she didn't want to become a lightning rod for controversy, she could no longer remain silent about it. The next day, at precisely 8:58 a.m., Gavin stood outside the Internal Affairs office. A short, broad-shouldered man with thinning hair approached him, Sergeant Gabriel Martinez, the IA officer in charge of the investigation. Martinez had a calm, neutral expression. Gavin braced himself, struggling to appear composed. They entered a windowless interview room. The walls were institutional grey, the fluorescent lights casting a cold glow. Martinez gestured for Gavin to have a seat. "Officer Wilson," he began, his tone as neutral as his expression, "we have received a complaint regarding a traffic stop you conducted. The complainant has alleged that the stop was racially motivated, that you used intimidation tactics, and that there was no valid reason to pull her over. Would you care to share your account of what happened?" Gavin tried to maintain his composure. In a measured tone, he explained his version, that Ebony's driving had seemed suspicious, that she appeared to roll through a stop sign, that she was initially cooperative but later became defensive. He omitted the fact that Ebony's roll through a stop sign was likely an invention of his own frustration. He also omitted certain details regarding his hostility. Instead, he painted a picture of a conscientious officer simply doing his duty. Sergeant Martinez listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes. "Officer," Martinez said, "the woman you pulled over has submitted dashcam footage, her own camera, mounted on the dashboard. It clearly shows her coming to a complete stop. It also shows the conversation you had with her." Gavin felt as though he'd been struck in the chest. He hadn't counted on Ebony having her own dashcam. "I must inform you that the conversation recorded raises significant concerns," Martinez continued. "At one point, you claimed you would call for a 9 unit if she didn't submit to a search. Yet you had no probable cause for the search. That's a violation of protocol. Furthermore, you used language that could be interpreted as harassing." Gavin's pulse pounded. He knew how damning dashcam footage could be, especially from Ebony's vantage point. The video probably captured every detail: his tone, his posture, his phrasing. If Ebony's story matched the footage, and he had tried to cover it with a false narrative, he'd be in even deeper trouble. He felt trapped, cornered by his own choices. "One," Gavin began, searching for words. He thought about apologizing or admitting he might have misread the situation, but his pride and self-preservation instincts flared. He stuck to his story. "It looked like a rolling stop, and she refused to show me her bag. I was concerned for my safety." "We can't be too careful out there, Sergeant." Martinez's eyes remained neutral, yet unimpressed. "We'll be reviewing all evidence. I suggest you remain honest. A departmental hearing will be set, and until then, you will be on desk duty." It was not a request, it was a declaration. Gavin nodded stiffly, feeling a storm of anger and dread swirl inside him. Word spread quickly within the precinct. Many officers found themselves in hushed conversations whenever Gavin was out of earshot. A few shrugged it off. "Just another complaint," they said. But those who had read Ebony Carter's name in the incident report recognized the seriousness of tangling with an assistant state's attorney. Some started distancing themselves from Gavin, while others tried to lend quiet sympathy. Officer Lucy Yates, a friend of Gavin's, approached him after hours in the break room. "Hey Gav," Lucy started softly. "I heard about the complaint. Are you okay?" Gavin shrugged. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice came out sharper than intended. "It's just a misunderstanding." Lucy studied him, concern etched on her face. "Look, I know it's tough, but Ebony Carter is a big name in the courthouse. She's been making waves, positive waves. From what I hear, she's tough but fair. If she felt compelled to file a complaint, there must have been a reason. I'm just saying, be cautious." A flicker of resentment sparked in Gavin's chest. "You don't think I have a reason to pull someone over who could be suspicious? Are you on her side?" Lucy sighed, suddenly cautious of Gavin's tone. "I'm on the side of the truth, Gavin. I'm just telling you to be careful. For Ebony, the days following her complaint were nerve-wracking. While she tried to maintain her usual workload, preparing briefs, attending court hearings, coordinating with other attorneys, she felt the unspoken tension. Some of her colleagues learned of the incident and expressed quiet support, while others worried it might strain the relationship between the state's attorney's office and the CPD. Ebony also received a polite but pointed phone call from her boss, who reminded her to keep personal matters separate from her prosecutorial duties. She assured him she'd follow all protocols and that the complaint was handled by the proper channels. One afternoon, Ebony visited the office of a trusted friend, Detective Juan Delgado of the Chicago PD. Juan was a liaison officer who often worked side by side with prosecutors, building cases based on thorough police work. Ebony knocked softly on the open door. "Got a minute?" she asked. Juan looked up from his desk, instantly concerned at Ebony's subdued tone. Of course. Close the door, he said, clearing a stack of folders so she could sit down. Ebony recounted the stop from beginning to end, leaving out no detail. Juan listened with furrowed brows, occasionally exhaling with frustration. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry that happened to you, Ebony. It's not right. And while I don't know Officer Wilson personally, I've heard the name in passing. He's not known for his gentle approach. Ebony nodded, pressing her lips together. I'm worried about the departmental hearing. I'm not trying to single-handedly topple an officer's career, but something has to be done, Juan. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was outright profiling, intimidation, and lying about a stop sign. The dashcam footage doesn't lie. Juan gave her a reassuring look. You have every right to speak your truth. If he's in the wrong, internal affairs will handle it. And if for some reason they try to brush it off, your position as Asa means you have the platform to hold him accountable. Ebony was grateful for Juan's support, but underneath her determination, she felt a knot of anxiety. She knew that the blue wall of silence sometimes reared its head, protecting officers even when they were clearly at fault. The city had come a long way in addressing police misconduct, but Ebony also knew how messy departmental investigations could be. She didn't want to become the face of an internal war between the police and the state's attorney's office. She only wanted to ensure accountability and fairness. As the departmental hearing approached, Gavin Wilson's anxiety grew. He was summoned before a review board composed of senior officers, internal affairs representatives, and a civilian oversight member. The room was formal, arranged with a long table where the board members sat, and a single chair in front for Gavin. The tension was suffocating. Sergeant Martinez began by summarizing the complaint. Then Ebony was asked to give a statement. She stood calmly in front of the board, her posture erect, her voice firm. She recounted the events once more, detailing her full stop at the sign, her calm demeanor, and how Wilson continued to escalate. She presented her dashcam footage. The board watched quietly, expressions ranging from stoic to concerned. It was evident from the video that Ebony had indeed stopped completely, that her tone had been respectful, and that Gavin had grown increasingly aggressive, culminating in his threat to call a 9 unit. Throughout the recording, Ebony's hands were visible on the wheel or retrieving her documents. There was no sudden movement, no cause for suspicion. She'd only refused a bag search because Gavin had offered no valid reason. Finally, she showed on camera her business card, revealing she was an assistant state's attorney, though she made no dramatic statements. The entire scene left little room for spin. When it was Gavin's turn to respond, he felt sweat prickle at his hairline. He tried to maintain dignity, restating how he believed Ebony had run the stop sign and how he was concerned for his safety. But the dashcam footage contradicted his every claim. The expressions on the board members' faces told him they were unconvinced. One of them, a lieutenant who had decades of experience, finally asked the question, "Officer Wilson, do you believe your stop might have been influenced by unconscious bias or prejudice in any way?" Gavin stiffened. He wanted to say no, that he was only doing his job, but the question hung in the air, echoing the truth. In that pause, Ebony's calm gaze met his. For a brief moment, Gavin faltered. He remembered all the times he had rolled through a stop sign himself, all the times he hadn't pulled over white drivers for equally minor or non-existent infractions. He felt a bitter pang of guilt, but also a twisted resentment that his entire career could be jeopardized by this single incident. I was doing my job," Gavin said finally. "I believed there was a violation." His voice sounded hollow, even to himself. The board adjourned, stating they would review the evidence and reconvene in a week to issue a recommendation. Ebony left without a word to Gavin, returning to her office where she dived into case files, trying to bury the emotional toll under the weight of her professional responsibilities. That night, Gavin sat alone in his modest apartment near Bronzeville, staring at the flickering TV screen without really seeing it. He had a half-eaten slice of pizza growing cold on the coffee table. He was far from the confident officer he'd once been. His mind was a storm of regrets and bitterness. He couldn't deny that the dashcam footage painted him as the aggressor. He also couldn't deny that Ebony Carter had done absolutely nothing suspicious or illegal. But instead of fully embracing accountability, part of him raged, feeling singled out. He was at war with himself. He thought of the times in his teenage years when he had been singled out by older white officers while walking home. He thought of how that instilled in him a certain bitterness, a conviction that the system was stacked. But, ironically, here he was, perpetuating a different brand of prejudice. He considered picking up the phone to call Ebony and apologize, but he knew that wouldn't erase the formal complaint, nor would it necessarily change the outcome of the hearing. Still, the flicker of conscience was there, urging him to do something right. Eventually, he dragged himself to bed, sleep elusive as guilt, fear, and denial took turns rattling his thoughts. A week later, the Departmental Review Board reconvened. Ebony chose not to attend the final announcement, trusting the process to unfold without her presence. Gavin sat alone in the hearing room while the members explained their findings. The dashcam footage and Ebony's consistent testimony had left little doubt. Officer Gavin Wilson had performed an unjustified stop, lied about a traffic violation, and leveraged intimidation tactics in an encounter that displayed clear racial bias. The official recommendation was a suspension without pay for 3 months, followed by mandatory retraining in cultural sensitivity, ethics, and de-escalation techniques. The board also required a thorough review of his past traffic stops to see if there was a pattern of misconduct. It was a punishing blow, yet, in many eyes, it was lenient compared to termination. When the verdict was read, Gavin felt his heart sink. 3 months without pay, he had mortgage bills, car payments, day-to-day living expenses. Retraining sounded humiliating. He pictured himself in a classroom surrounded by recruits, half his age, lectured on how not to racially profile. A swirl of humiliation and anger coursed through him, but he was powerless to fight it. The only alternative was resigning, which might ruin his career entirely. After the hearing, Gavin slouched down a quiet hallway, ignoring the sympathetic or judgmental looks from fellow officers. He made his way to the precinct's parking lot, intending to slip away in his car without conversation. But just as he reached his vehicle, a quiet voice called his name. "Officer Wilson?" Ebony Carter stood a short distance away, her expression reserved, her posture poised. Gavin's body tensed, everything inside him screaming to retreat. Yet he turned to face her. She stepped closer. "I wanted you to know that I'm not out to destroy your life or career," she began carefully. "But I couldn't let what happened go unchecked." Gavin swallowed, his mouth dry. He felt a flash of defensiveness, an urge to lash out. But staring at Ebony, he saw a person who, for all her professional achievement, was still just someone who wanted to drive home without fear of being profiled. The logic of that was simple and irrefutable. He paused, the words tangling in his throat. "I'm sorry," he finally said, though the apology felt small compared to the harm caused. Ebony searched his face. She nodded. "I appreciate that, Officer Wilson, but more than an apology, I hope you understand why this can't happen, why this shouldn't happen to anyone." With that, she offered a curt nod and walked away. Gavin stood there, feeling exposed. This was his karma. He had allowed jaded stereotypes to infiltrate his policing. The cost was months of financial strain, professional humiliation, and deep personal regret. But that was only the beginning of his penance. During his suspension, Gavin was required to attend a series of workshops. The first session was ironically taught by a civilian instructor affiliated with the University of Chicago. Someone Ebony's mother, Dr. Leslie Carter, knew quite well. The workshop was about implicit bias in law enforcement. Officers, both seasoned and fresh out of the academy, filled the room. Some looked eager to learn, others looked bored or resentful. Gavin felt a mix of shame and curiosity. The instructor-led exercises meant to uncover subconscious beliefs. There were group discussions and role-playing scenarios. At first, Gavin participated stiffly, reluctant to reveal any vulnerability. But one particular exercise forced him to reflect on the stereotypes he held about young black drivers. The instructor asked him, "Why do you think you get suspicious when you see someone from certain backgrounds? Is it based on data, personal experiences, or assumptions?" A hush settled in the room. Gavin's mind spun with justifications, crime rates, the neighborhoods he patrolled, the battered cynicism from years on the force. Yet none of it truly excused what he did to Ebony Carter. Something inside him cracked open, letting in the possibility that he had allowed prejudice to warp his perspective. For the first time since that fateful stop, he felt a genuine sting of remorse, not just for the consequences, but for the harm inflicted on Ebony and possibly others before her. Over weeks of suspended duty and workshops, Gavin had time to think. He visited a financial counselor to figure out how to manage his bills on no income for 3 months. He had to cut back on luxuries, put a temporary hold on his beloved Harley-Davidson weekend rides, and even considered picking up part-time security work just to keep afloat. The mounting stress was constant, yet ironically, it forced him to slow down and take stock of his life. He reconnected with some old friends who weren't in law enforcement, and their perspectives on policing startled him. They talked about being pulled over for driving while black, about the fear and distrust that brewed in their communities. Gavin listened, for once, with an open heart. Meanwhile, Ebony carried on with her duties at the state's attorney's office, focusing on prosecuting domestic violence cases and working on initiatives to reduce gun violence on the south and west sides of Chicago. She heard through the grapevine that Gavin Wilson had been suspended and was undergoing training. Part of her felt satisfied that the system had done something in this instance. Another part felt the weight of a bigger, more systemic issue. She knew that for every dashcam or cell phone that recorded a questionable stop, there were countless others that went undocumented. One evening, Ebony attended a small public forum in Bronzeville, aimed at building community trust with law enforcement. She was there in a professional capacity to answer legal questions about prosecutions and community resources. The panel included a local alderman, a community organizer, a police liaison, and Ebony herself. After the formal discussion, Ebony mingled with residents, listening to their concerns. Some recognized her from media coverage of high-profile cases, while others were simply eager to share their stories. Near the end of the event, Ebony felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned and found herself looking at a woman in her mid-50s, short hair flecked with silver. She introduced herself as Deborah Wilson, Gavin Wilson's aunt. Ebony's eyes widened slightly in surprise. She braced herself, uncertain if this would be a confrontation or something else. "I wanted to speak to you," Deborah began quietly, leading Ebony to a corner of the room. "I'm Gavin's aunt. I know about what happened. I'm not here to argue or defend him. I'm here to say, I'm sorry. I raised him for part of his life after his parents died. He's a good man, or used to be, but he's lost his way." Ebony felt a mix of pity and caution. She nodded politely, allowing Deborah to continue. "My nephew's made a lot of mistakes, and I know you didn't have to report him, but you did the right thing," Deborah said, voice trembling. "I've seen how the job changed him, how bitterness took hold. This might be the wake-up call he needs, and I thank you for that." Ebony pressed her lips together, overwhelmed by the sincerity. "I appreciate your words. It wasn't my intention to hurt him, just to address what happened. I'm hoping he'll find a better path forward, too." Deborah gave a sad smile. "I just wanted you to know he's not evil, just broken. I'll keep praying for him and for all of us to do better." They parted ways, and Ebony was left with a swirl of emotions. She felt compassion for the older woman, and a sliver of compassion for Gavin as well. This wasn't about one cop. It was about a broken system that cultivated fear and prejudice. Yet real people, real families, were caught in the crossfire. She silently vowed to continue her work, fighting for justice and reform wherever she could. Months passed, and Gavin completed his suspension. He'd gone through every mandated workshop, endured every departmental scrutiny of his past stops. He was allowed back on active duty, albeit with a watchful eye from his superiors. The forced introspection had changed him more than he wanted to admit. He found himself scanning the streets with a different perspective, consciously questioning his own biases. He also found himself going through an emotional turmoil whenever he considered that Ebony Carter was still out there, working in the same justice system he was sworn to uphold. He had fleeting thoughts of reaching out again, offering more than a muttered apology in a parking lot. But the shame stopped him. He still had pride, still had lingering resentment. Yet the memory of Ebony's controlled composure and unwavering self-respect kept nudging at his conscience. He wondered if he could ever truly atone for what he'd done, not just to Ebony, but to those who might have endured similar stops. He wondered if the job he once loved had become an excuse for him to project his own anger onto others. One cold day in early winter, Gavin found himself responding to a call about a break-in at an apartment complex near Ebony's old neighborhood. The victim was a single mother who had come home from work to find her door kicked in, valuables stolen. As Gavin took her statement, the woman's daughter, about 8 years old, kept staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. He remembered being a child, once trusting the uniform to protect him. He also recalled Ebony's face that night, the look of uneasy tension when he pulled her over for no reason. It struck him that trust is fragile, easily lost, and painfully difficult to rebuild. During the days that followed, Gavin made a conscious effort to do better. He found himself talking more patiently with residents, explaining procedures, and reminding himself that each person he encountered was a human being. First a father, a mother, a student, an elder, a neighbor. His transformation wasn't magical or immediate, but it was sincere. Word eventually reached Ebony that Gavin Wilson had returned to duty and was reportedly conducting himself differently. She heard from Detective Delgado about a couple of interactions in which Wilson demonstrated a more respectful approach. Ebony was skeptical, but she allowed herself a faint hope that maybe the ordeal had sparked a change. Then, unexpectedly, she received an email from an unknown sender, E. "Carter, would you be open to meeting for coffee? I'd like to apologize properly. G. Wilson." She stared at the message for a long moment, uncertain how to respond. Finally, after a day of deliberation, she agreed. They chose a small cafe, the Sip and Savor on 43rd, known for its intimate, relaxed atmosphere. Ebony arrived first, found a table near the back. She wore her professional attire, a neat blazer ready to head to court afterward. Gavin arrived a few minutes later, looking uneasy in plain clothes. He noticed her and gave a tentative nod. Sitting across from her, he fiddled with his cup as though unsure how to begin. The tension was palpable. Ebony waited, arms gently folded, her posture calm yet alert. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Gavin began, voice low. "I said it before, but I don't think I meant it the way I do now. I've had time to think, to realize how I treated you that night. It was wrong. And I was lying to myself for a long time. Ebony listened, her expression neutral, giving him space to speak. He continued, I've spent these months thinking about why I did it. I was frustrated with my life, and I let stereotypes cloud my judgment. I get how serious that is now. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. That's up to you. But I do want you to know that I understand the gravity of what I did. Ebony took a sip of her coffee, allowing silence to stretch a moment. Then she said, I appreciate you reaching out, Officer Wilson. It takes courage to own mistakes. But you must realize it's not just about one apology. It's about changing behavior and challenging the mindset that led you to pull me over in the first place. Gavin nodded, his eyes downcast. I do realize that. I'm trying. The mandatory training actually helped, and I'm trying to keep learning. He paused, searching for words. I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Ebony studied him for a moment, measuring sincerity. She recognized the vulnerability. She knew how the policing culture often resisted self-critique. Well, I guess it's up to you to prove that, she said softly. Actions speak louder than words. A subdued relief crossed Gavin's features. They spoke for a while longer, mostly about the challenges of the justice system. Ebony shared her perspective on the root causes of crime, the need for genuine community engagement, and how adversarial relationships between police and citizens fueled tension. Gavin explained the daily pressures of policing, how officers sometimes developed siege mentalities. They didn't solve the world's problems in one conversation, but they took a step toward understanding. When Ebony left for court, she paused at the door, glancing back. She offered Gavin a small, acknowledging nod, and he returned it, gratitude in his eyes. It was far from a grand reconciliation, but it was a crack in the wall, a beginning. Perhaps Ebony's complaint had been the impetus for meaningful change, not just in Gavin, but in a system that desperately needed it. That one night on a Chicago street revealed how a simple traffic stop can crack open deeper truths about power, prejudice, and the courage to seek accountability. While their initial confrontation was fraught with tension, it forced both Officer Gavin Wilson and Assistant State's Attorney Ebony Carter to confront hidden biases and personal vulnerabilities. Ultimately, it was neither vengeance nor blind forgiveness that emerged, but an uneasy hope that lessons were learned. If their story shows us anything, it's that real change happens when individuals choose honesty over denial, responsibility over excuses. It demands that every community member, from citizen to public servant, plays a part in building mutual respect. Let us take this story as a reminder that growth is possible, and that confrontation, while difficult, can be the birthplace of real transformation. If this video resonated with you, please like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories. Together, we can cultivate the empathy and accountability our communities so urgently need.